What's up, fam? This is Matt Sams back again with the Deep Ministry Project. I cannot tell y'all how grateful I am to be able to be back online with y'all. The past couple of weeks have been very rough for me, been dealing with some medical issues, but by the grace of God, I am doing much better. I am on the other side of those things. Still got to do a couple of follow-up visits to see the origin, but during that time, I was down, being in so much pain, y'all. I'm telling you, I could not focus on anything. I was in a very uncomfortable circumstance, going through that. But by the grace of God, like I said, that's behind me now. I'm back, and I wanted to touch bases with y'all today for another edition of Additions to my library. So today, I have a little bit something different. I'm not going to be revealing a variety of books. It is just a set that I wanted to get, and I'm going to tell y'all why I decided to get this particular set. What I have today is simply what you call a commentary, but it's dealing with just one book of the Bible. So this particular commentary that I got, just to give y'all a little bit of background or a whole lot of background before I reveal it. This particular commentary set that I got deals with the Gospel of Mark. The reason why I was interested in this commentary is due to my reading. Just completed this book right here called Reading Backwards by Richard B. Hayes. If y'all look on the previous episodes, I forgot which episode it was, which part it was, where I actually unboxed this book. So over the past few weeks, I've been reading a little bit here and there. This is a very, very short read. In fact, the end of this book, from page 111 to the end of it, this is all just notes. This is his bibliography. So this deals with the figural Christology in the fourfold gospel witness. So he actually goes through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and gives you a deep dive. And this very short, condensed book, he gives you a deep dive that, like I say all the time, man, it is so valuable. I didn't think he was going to be able to pull as much substance as he was able to out of, the four gospels dealing with such little space. But when I say I was blown away, it was amazing. No ink was wasted throughout the entirety of this book. So if y'all are interested, this is Richard B. Hayes, Reading Backwards. So why did I get a commentary dealing with the Gospel of Mark? What I decided to do as I was going through Hayes's book, Reading Backwards, he was giving some of the sources that he had as to why he came to the conclusion that he came to, or scholars that agreed with him. And what I decided to do when we went through the Gospel of Mark, I said, I'm going to pick, looking at his endnotes, I wanted to pick one of the primary sources that he used and, add that resource to my arsenal. So I did that for Mark. I did that for Matthew, the two books that I wanted for the Gospel of Matthew, which is not a set or a commentary set, but it's two books that I wanted for the Gospel of Matthew. Those are currently in my wish list right now. I did not pick anything for the Gospel of Luke, for the reason the book that he did reference and that he was pulling a lot from, I already have it in my library, which is this book right here. If I can find it, it is by Kevin C. Rowe. Here it is. Early Narrative Christology, the Lord and the Gospel of Luke. So I decided, hey, I already got that. Not finna look for nothing else. The Gospel of John, can't remember which one I actually chose, but y'all will be seeing those on another episode that is in the future, Lord willing, very soon. But as he was going through the Gospel of Mark, one of the things that I admired that he did, and I'm very appreciative when scholars do this, they didn't come at Mark with the presupposition that Mark has a low Christology. You have some liberal scholars that do that. They try to say that Mark was the earliest gospel, which in my opinion, it was the Gospel of Matthew, but that's neither here nor there. They say that the Gospel of Mark is the earliest of the Gospels, that Matthew and Luke copied immensely from the Gospel of Mark, and that Mark had a very low Christology. And as you go to the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, that Christology begins to heighten. They begin to add more to make Jesus look more deified, for lack of words. And then by the time you get to the Gospel of John, Jesus is God. That cannot be further from the truth. I'm going to give y'all one example out of Richard B. Hayes' book, and then I'm going to do this book reveal and let y'all know what I chose. Several reasons off the top of my head why that can't be true. We're dealing with Christology in the New Testament alone. One of the first writers, if not the first, was the Apostle Paul. The book of Galatians is dated very early. And I can show you in the book of Galatians where the Apostle Paul has a very high Christology. Tempted not to do that here. That should actually go on a lesson later. Well, the Apostle Paul literally, says Jesus is the angel of the Lord. A lot of people miss that. And that's just me teasing right now. But that's something that could be done. You have other early writings of the Apostle Paul that predate or are contemporary with the Gospels. But nevertheless, let's just deal with the Gospels. Mark does not have a low Christology whatsoever. If you go to the very beginning of the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1, you have the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So right from the onset, Mark exclaims that Jesus is the Son of God. In verse number 3, well, I'll just read verses 2 through 3. As it is written in Isaiah the prophet, behold, I send my messenger before your face who will prepare your way, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight. That is a quote from Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. And it's talking about the messenger, the one that's crying in the wilderness. For my Bible scholars and students out there, that is John the Baptist, and he's preparing the way of the Lord. Mark is quoting Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. As I said, if you go back and read Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3, it literally says, prepare the way of Yahweh. So, in the first few verses, you have this high Christology that is found in Mark. And just to give y'all a couple of examples, one that I've known because I've taught it before, but it has been expanded in Richard B. Hayes' book. This is on page 25. The way he frames it is as Mark is setting his audience up, asking these questions about Jesus. Who is this man? And the conclusion that you're supposed to come to is that this man is Yahweh, that he is the Lord. that he is the Son of God. And if you go through the Gospel of Mark, it is not until you get to the very end where you have the centurion at the cross that literally confesses that this man must have been the Son of God. So, page 25, this is dealing with the episode of Jesus walking on the sea. That is Mark, in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus walking on the sea, family. That is in Mark chapter 6, beginning at verse number 45, Jesus walking on water. And just to read a little bit of this, and I'm going to tell y'all, this is what blew me away. It says, immediately, beginning at verse number 5, chapter 6, immediately he made his disciples get into a boat and go before him to the other side to Bethsaida, where he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them, and it was about the fourth watch of the night. He came to them walking on the sea. He meant to pass them by, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out. For they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And literally in the Greek, and is not "it is I." In the Greek, it literally says "I am." Verse 51, and he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astonished, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. So you have Jesus walking on the sea, and Mark, he adds this caveat, is found in verse number 48 at the very end. It says he meant to pass them by. So just the mere fact that Jesus is walking on the sea, for those who are familiar with the Old Testament, who is the one that walks on the sea? Well, in order to know that, we'll have to go to Job chapter 9. Keep our finger in Mark chapter 6, and we'll be going to Job chapter 9 to figure out who is the one that walks on the sea. So I'm turning to Job 9. I'm going to read this. And this is the part where I said this is something that I knew prior to reading the book, but I'm going to show y'all where I was blown away. Okay? So, Job chapter 9, verse number 8, it says, "Who alone stretched out the heavens and trampled the waves of the sea?" So, Job chapter 9, who is the one that stretched out the heavens? Well, immediately in our mind, God is the creator. It is God. Who is the one that trampled on the waves? Once more, the answer is God. All right. So, and to kind of emphasize that, if you go back to the beginning of chapter 9, Job answered and said, "Truly I know that it is so, but how can a man be in the right before God? If one wished to contend with him, one cannot answer him once in 1,000 times. He is wise in heart and mighty in strength, who is hardened himself against him and succeeded. He who removes mountains and they are not. He who overturns them in his anger, who shakes the earth out of its place and its pillars tremble. Who commands the sun and it does not rise? Who seals up the stars? Who alone stretched out the heavens and trampled on the waves of the sea?" So Job is talking about God. And this is a connection that was made aware to me prior to reading Richard B. Hayes' book. And I actually wrote a note in my Bible, dealing with that passage in Mark chapter 6, that this goes back to Job chapter 9. But this is where this particular book expanded, and he references this scholar that I have in this box over here. Just something simple as just keep reading. So remember when I said that Mark added a caveat that God intended to pass, or Jesus intended to pass them by, talking about the disciples in the boat. So if you keep reading, verse number 10, it says, who does great things beyond searching out and marvelous things beyond number. Verse number 11, behold, he passes by me and I see him not. He moves on and I do not perceive him. So in Job chapter 9:11, Job says, behold, he passes me by. He passes me by and I see him not. He moves on and I do not perceive him. So let's turn back to Mark chapter 6, verse 48. Let's read this once again. Mark 6:48. Mark 6:48. This is what it reads. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them, and about the fourth watch of the night he came to them walking on the sea, and he meant to pass them by. So you have Jesus embodying, or let's put it this way, in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus Christ is God in the flesh. He is literally Yahweh walking around. He is doing things that you see only God can do in the Old Testament. Remember, Job says in chapter 9, verse 8, it is God alone who stretched out the heavens and trampled on the waves of the sea. And then in verse number 11, he says that the same God is the one who passes him by, yet he does not perceive him. But that wasn't convincing enough. This is the part that blew me away. Not only verse number 11, but I'm going to read some of page 25 from Richard B. Hayes. It says, and he gives family a litany of biblical references from the Psalms, from the book of Job, but I'm only going to touch bases on the book of Exodus, just dealing with this scene of Christ walking on the water. He says, thus in Job 9, the image of God's walking on the sea is linked with the confession of God's mysterious transcendence of human comprehension. God passes by as a metaphor for our inability to grasp his power. This metaphor accords deeply with Mark's emphasis on the elusiveness of the divine presence in Jesus. Thus, the story of Jesus' emphatic walking on the sea, read against the background of Job 9, can be perceived as a signature image of Markan Christology. He goes on to say, next paragraph, to these observations should be added the insight that the verb, and he gives the Greek verb for pass by, almost surely alludes to Exodus chapter 33, verses 17 through 23, and Exodus 34:6, where God is said to pass by Moses in order to reveal his glory indirectly, for no one shall see me and live. And then he goes on to say the Septuagint repeatedly uses, he gives the Greek term again in this passage, with the result that it subsequently becomes almost a technical term for a divine epiphany. Thus, Mark's mysterious statement in Mark 6:48, read as an allusion to the Exodus theophany, suggests simultaneously that Jesus walking on the water is a manifestation of the divine glory. So let me go to Exodus chapter 33. So what Richard B. Hayes is saying, and he's going to give, he gives a scholar that he gives the scholar that agrees with this conclusion or where he derived this conclusion from. So Exodus 33, 17 through 23. Remember, Moses asked the Lord to see his glory. So beginning at verse number 17, and the Lord said to Moses, this very thing you have spoken, I will do, for you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name. Moses said, please show me your glory. And he said, I will make my goodness. I'm reading out the ESV right now, but in the Septuagint, the LXX, the literal word that they have there is, this is what God says, I will make my glory pass by you, and I will proclaim before you my name, the Lord, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy to whom I show mercy. So going to verse number 20, but he said, you cannot see my face, for men shall not see me and live. And the Lord said, behold, there's a place by me where you shall stand on the rock. And while my glory passes by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. There's that verb again. Verse 23, he says, then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. So going down to, what is it? Chapter 34, verse 6, it says, the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. So what Richard B. Hayes is doing, what he did, he not only highlighted how Mark derived how Mark derived or connected that Jesus intending to pass by the disciples on the sea was a direct allusion to Job chapter 9, verses, let's say 8 through 11, but he also connects that with Exodus chapter 33, verses 17 through 23, as well as Exodus chapter 34, 6, where you have the Lord passing by Moses, whom he put in the cleft of the rock. All that to say this, Mark had a very high Christology. And a lot of times when people, read the Gospel of Mark, these things are simply missed, because if you just read the Gospel of Mark, it seems like Mark is in a rush. There's always the word immediately being used. And I have been guilty of this in the past myself. When people ask me all the time, they be like, Matt, or brother Matt, where should I start reading the Bible? Should I just go from Genesis to Revelation? I tell them to start with the Gospel of Mark, because that is something I feel that people can grasp. It is, beginner level, but as I dive deeper into it, I find myself, man, just blown away by what God is doing. So all that to say this, Richard B. Hayes, one of the primary sources that he used in the section for reading backwards, dealing with Mark and Christology, he used a individual by the name of Joel Marcus, who wrote an extensive treatment or commentary on Mark. So I told you I got a set, and this is just dealing with chapters 1 through 8. This is by Joel Marcus. This is the Anchor Bible introduction and commentary by Joel Marcus. So let me tell y'all something. Me just reading what I read in here and the connections that he made and looking at the end notes and seeing the comments made by Joel Marcus, I could not just pass this up. I had to get it for myself. This is one of those books, though it is a introduction and a commentary. The stuff that is in here, and I'm not only going by Richard B. Hayes now, just the reviews that I've seen on this particular work. Um, you know, this is something I probably will read from front to back. This is not something I'm just gonna, hey, I'm preaching on Mark chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. Let me go see what he has to say here. I think I want to read the whole thing, beginning to end. So this is, you could say, volume 1, dealing with chapters 1 through 8. And it should be no surprise that this is the part 2. And which it is dealing with Mark chapter 8 through 16. So if y'all notice, this is one of the reasons I didn't pull the trigger as early as I did. There's a difference between these two books. One of them, as you can see, this is paper. This one right here is hardcover. So try to be uniform and get both of these books, either both paper or hardcover. It is extremely difficult to do. So try to get both of them in hardcover. This book right here, I forgot how much it cost. Maybe let's just say $50, somewhere in there. To get it in hardcover, to get it new in hardcover is very rare. You can find a used hardcover. I don't like buying used books if I don't have to. Sometimes that's the only way I can get them. But in order to buy this book new in hardcover, I think people were asking anywhere from what was it, $110 to $114. And I was like, nah, let me be wise with the little funds that I have. And then, I was like, well, I'll just get both of them paper. You can't find a paper copy of chapters 8 through 16. So, I just said, look, it's about what's in them and not how they look on the outside. By the time I get done with both of these, they're going to be marked up, read through, highlighted. Anyway, I'm more interested in the jewels I can mine out of here, not so much as what it looks like on the outside. So that is going to conclude this addition to additions to my library today. I know I took a whole lot of time just to reveal two books that actually make a set. I have more that is coming, but as always, y'all, I cannot wait to get into these, especially, let's just say I wanted to read devotionally through the Gospel of Mark. I'm going to have Mark open, and I'm also going to have Joel Marcus, his commentary open as well. Very rare these days that I would buy a commentary just based on one book. I made an exception for Joel Marcus. The other scholar that I made an exception for is Dr. Michael L. Morales with his Numbers commentary, simply because his book, Who Shall Ascend the Mountain of the Lord, was so good. That man can release some sci-fi fiction and I'll buy it at this point. But that concludes all that I have. I will be giving y'all an update soon, what I'll be doing next as far as teaching and not just book reveals. As always, this is Matt Sams with the Deep Ministry Project. I pray that your Christology is heightened and your biblical literacy is deepened. Until the next time, this is the part where I give y'all a peace. I am out of here, family. I will see y'all next time.